there's a very specific strategy here that makes sense. So the first thing is trying to understand as a publisher where reselling is helping and where it isn't. I went through one of our publishers' accounts and they had 54 Pubmatic lines in there on Scott text. We reached out to Pubmatic and they're like, basically 95% is through our direct seat. Basically, you're getting 54 requests per request, even though you're still only spending basically in one path. So step one for us with a lot of our clients was basically, we're going to massively cut everything out and just see what happens. So that publisher's Pubmatic spend went up. All of these publishers' jounce scores went through the roof. The second thing was going back to that traffic shaping. If you can either cut out a ton of non-valuable requests and shift that to more valuable requests, it basically increases the SSP's return on request. And so those two things we've seen work time and time again across tens and tens of billions of requests a month.
Welcome to The Pubway, an original podcast by SeedTag, the global leader in neurocontextual advertising. Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the media ecosystem to unpack the trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the supply side of ad tech. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Pubway podcast. My name is Tina Yanakino.
And I'm Mike Villalobos. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about how publishers can leverage large language models, automation, and of course, AI in ways to find innovative strategies for monetization.
And joining us to talk about all these amazing topics is our friend Jared Siegal, founder and CEO at Aditude. Hey, Jared, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Amazing. Before we dive in all these topics, it'd be great if you give our audience a quick background on your career trajectory, how you founded Aditude, just for a little context.
Sure. I've been in the publishing space since 2012. Got in a little bit by accident. Wanted to go into the car industry. Couldn't get a job. Got introduced to the founders of answers.com. Went to the same university as me. Got offered a job and sort of figured out what I was going to be doing later. So yeah, I've been in since 2012, worked at Answers post their eventual sale to private equity. After that, I went to a company called Playbuzz, helped them build out their video product. Was there for a few years. And then in 2019, I went out on my own and started Aditude. Really similar story, I think, to most entrepreneurs. I made a few other companies a lot of money. Didn't make much for myself, so I decided to try it on my own. And knock on wood, it's been going pretty well so far.
I love it. I mean, so basically what I'm hearing is you like to tinker. If you're an auto guy, you're very much someone who likes to modify things, which is a really good place to be in ad tech. I will say the nexus of ad tech, especially between, I would say, structured data and unstructured data, is going to be ad operations. It's one of the few places where you're going to get both, whether it be log level files and ad placements through a structured format, or unstructured, where like creativity or creative analysis, and then also just general troubleshooting is a little bit more wiry, if you will. So the first question to kick things off on the ad operations side is, what does it look like to apply LLMs or even automation in ad operations today?
Yeah, so I would say that we're still getting our feet wet there. We're probably 6-7 months into this. For those that don't know, an language learning model is basically trying to apply or analyze data in a way that you can apply to your daily activities. So how we're leveraging it on our end is kind of in two ways. A lot around flooring and a lot around SPO. So as it relates to flooring, you can think about so many different inputs that a model or a decision has to take into account before saying, hey, this is what my 5-cent floor should be, my 20-cent floor. Things like the operating system and browser and time of day and country, but also who that exact user is and what happened 10 seconds ago on that page and so forth. And so where we started off was honestly just collecting all of that data. It's literally trillions of data points a day across our inventory, and trying to use some sort of AI to at least just find patterns, right? Because you kind of don't know where to start when you have that much data, right? Yeah. And we essentially built out our very first prototype where it was using AI to create a static model, right? It set the rules and we kept it that way.
Hmm.
Just to, does that work? It's a great way to sort of get your feet wet before you have full trust in some type of artificial intelligence making live decisions for you. Let's see if the
Yeah.
decision it made a few minutes ago works for the next week, right? And lo and behold, it did, right? It worked quite well for us. And so where we're at now is deploying already like our V2 of this, where it is literally taking in all this real time data with some recency bias and making decisions on the fly across all of these requests. And it is showing quite a bit of lift. I wouldn't say that it's because AI is so much smarter than what people in AnOps have been doing and flooring. I think this is maybe kind of where there's a little bit of a misnomer there.
Yep.
It's more that like humans literally can't make the decisions at the speed that this is going to make decisions at, right? And rather than using the law of averages, we're using individual level kind of data sets to make decisions. So yeah,
Speed of positioning, right? To your point, like it's not just the speed of decision, but it's being able to be in the position to make the decision. Because you may be the best AdOps person in the world, but you can only look over between say 500 and 1,000 campaigns versus say you're running I'd say 5,000 for permutations of the same campaign. That's where AdOps or the AI and automation does come into play.
yeah. So rather than launching like the idea of an A/B test, well, let's talk about like literally launching hundreds of tests at the exact same time and seeing not just which test wins, but which combination of tests wins, right? Which is also super interesting. And so yeah, like this is taking a process that we've run pretty manually as an ad ops company over the last 5, 6 years and turning it on its head using the exact same logic, the exact same data points, but rather than doing it weekly, bi-weekly, whatever, in a manual process and kind of using averages, we're doing it in real time on the fly across everything. And so it's saved us a lot of time. It's made our publishers a lot of money, but it's also frankly saved us in ad ops a whole lot of time.
Yeah, the classic work smarter, not harder adage. And I know Mike and I talk about this a lot too, but it's like AI isn't coming for your job, but people who know and understand AI are. So especially in our industry, I feel like there is hesitation from a publisher's perspective, introducing different like AI models and automations into their workflows. But it all comes down to what you just said. It's just a smarter way of attacking things at scale.
Yeah, for 100% agree. For us, and then how we think of it as kind of a vendor in the space for our own employees, right? Is it frees them up to provide better service and support. Uh, and so rather than spending so much manual time doing tasks that are in many ways repetitive, we can spend that time having conversations with our clients and coming up with new ideas that we can then feed to a Claude or one of those systems, right, to come up with the next idea. So again, work smarter, not harder, maybe in this case, right? So yeah, so it's been a pretty big, like I said, time saver for us, and also performance lift on the flooring side. The other area that we have started to apply it to, which I think publishers, especially publishers of scale, aren't necessarily thinking about yet, but it's an obvious kind of next jump is around SPO and sort of the value of that request. And so just like with flooring, where there's a million inputs, right? There's just an infinite number of inputs there. It's the same thing with like, should I make this request to this SSP right now? Right? On this user. And you can use things like, well, my fill rate's dropping, so I should stop requests, right? Or on average in this country, my fill rate is poor, so in general, I shouldn't call this SSP there, right? And again, that all works. And publishers see value from that. SSPs who do their own traffic shaping see value from that. But again, you're sort of looking at the law of averages there, right? And so what we've started to realize is it's not that necessarily certain geos perform worse than others. It's that certain users perform worse than others, right? And so how do you use real-time data and feedback on the page itself to say, hey, this person in this country that on average has 10% fill is actually filling at 95%. And I need to jack floors up and I need to keep making requests to all my SSPs, right? But this user really never gets an ad. So why am I ever calling it, making a request to this user, right? And so what's been really interesting for us there is essentially what we're doing or been able to do is shift requests. Requests, when you think of traffic shaping and people are concerned about like, I'm making too many requests, you're making too many bad requests, right? And so we used an LLM to basically say, how do we shift requests from bad users to good users and essentially barely actually make a dent in overall requests,
Yep.
but substantially increase impressions.
To take one step back, define traffic shaping for our listeners. I think that'd be super helpful. And then I am gonna, and to Tina's constant comment of me pushing back, I am gonna push back a little bit on the traffic shaping on the users component. So let's define it first, and we'll go into the second topic of the 1A.
Sure, it's basically trying to clean up bad requests. That's the simplest way. But basically, not all requests are created equal. Not all users are created equal. So when I'm thinking about it as a publisher, should I make a request to all 10 SSPs that I have in my create request, or should I make a request at all to that user on that auction? It's a decision-making process of saying yes or no, right? And it could be, like I said, should I make a request at all? Maybe yes, maybe not. Should I request to 9 of the 10 SSPs and maybe leave one out because they haven't filled in 2 hours, right? It could be that granular of a level of decision as well. But it's basically trying to increase the value of the average user that the open market sees on your inventory.
And when you mention focusing on specific users to monetize, the question I had there was with user agents going away, obviously cookies they're half the time fairly prevalent, and some of the IDs being hit or miss. Does that one shrink down your user pool too small, and then two, are you missing the signal outside of the user that you're not optimizing for?
I think it's a good question or set of questions there. I'll say this, like when there is a match on user IDs, it greatly impacts performance. And we can talk about that for an hour, but like the data around user IDs is really bad because people aren't tracking it correctly. And we have some wild data there that shows it's working a lot of magic. But I to answer your first question, I'm like, I don't think so. And the reason being is you're using data in terms of what you are literally seeing at the user level on that page right now, right? So this isn't necessarily a user that you're going to follow around for hours and hours and hours, especially if they're like on iOS or Safari or Firefox or whatever, right? You literally can't do that, right? But what you can tell is on that page right then and there, did someone bid for the previous request or not, or that previous unit or not, right? And you can use some of that data to infer what's going to happen next. For example, everyone kind of knows the first 1, 2, 3 requests on a page are the most valuable requests, right? Like the CPM is the highest and it declines, right? Fill rate's the highest and it declines. So if you're on a user and you literally get 0 pre-bid bids or an Amazon bid on the very first request on that page, it's pretty unlikely that magically 2 minutes later, you're going to start getting fill, right?
Right.
And so you can start using some of that data to make decisions, right? Some of this other information, again, browser, operating system, if there are cookies on the page, what those user IDs are, can help you make further inferences, meaning forget about the first, the second, or third request, what's going to happen after the 10th request or the 15th request. But logic sort of dictates right away if that first ad has no demand, that's probably a user you don't need to care about right now in terms of making a request. You probably are better off as a company turning off ads for that user to increase the average value of what the exchange receive from you.
Yep, absolutely. And I think when it relates to kind of the automations and the testing that you're doing, Obviously, there's a lot of skepticism in AI adoption overall in our industry. There's a lot of people saying the same buzzwords, a lot of people
Yeah.
claiming the same things. And there's definitely good actors, but for every good actor, there's like 5 bad actors. So
Yeah.
for some of publish, and we can talk separately offline about all of those commonalities. But I would love to hear your thoughts on, from the publisher perspective, kind of navigating that world of the vendors, separating kind of the real value from more of the buzzy words.
Yeah. So there are, again, 100% agree with you on that. As a company that's also out there in the market, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, like, we make a lot of acquisitions and we're always on the hunt. Kill me when I hear companies saying that they're AI powered, right? Because 90% of them are not AI powered, right? They throw Chat GPT on something
AI
somewhere,
adopted.
yeah,
Yeah.
right? And so there's a few things that are, I would say, not necessarily critical, but important to think about when you're considering maybe a vendor as a publisher, you're considering vendors that are talking a lot about AI. First is, like, do they actually have an AI team? Like, do they have employees that are just focused on that, right? Because these systems are amazing, but leave them to their own devices and they're horrific, right? Like, if you don't know what you're doing with um Claude, for example, like, it's just going to do some crazy stuff, right? And so, like, you need to be an expert in this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how are they applying it, right? There are very rational or logical areas of our industry where adding an LLM or an MCP, we can talk about that too, and what Aditude's doing there, makes sense. And there are certain areas that, like, this makes absolutely no sense. Like, you're just saying that to say that, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing is trying to understand the data, right? So I hinted at this before, but one of the biggest issues that I think we have in our industry is that there's a lot of people making some crazy claims around 200% lift, 500% lift, install user IDs, install this AI pre-bid server mechanism, whatever, right? And unless you actually have proper A/B testing or reporting, it's really hard to believe that data. And I think that's where a lot of publishers become jaded, right? They're like, they get a lot of big promises and it never comes to reality, right? And so understanding how these companies or even internal teams, you're doing this internally, right? As a publisher, are measuring the success of these tests, making sure that there's a correct, like, control group, like holdout group, right?
Yep.
And if the data doesn't make sense, spending the time to understand why, right? If the results are so good that they, like, you start to suspect that it can't be true, it's probably because they're not true, right? And it's like, if I launch a test and I see a 50% increase in revenue per session, I'm like, that's amazing. What broke in the test, right? That doesn't exist in our market, right? So I think kind of taking all that into account is important. And then the conversation that you're having internally or externally as a publisher, right? If you start asking questions, or if the person is just using, again, like, all of these buzzwords,
Yeah.
and not actually getting into the nitty gritty of how it works, they don't actually know what they're
Correct.
talking about. It's more so they're just trying to um, jump on that bandwagon, right? And I feel like, to some extent, that's dying a little bit. A year ago, everyone said that they were an AI company.
Yeah.
And then, like, they realized that, like, investors didn't care about that, right? Like, unless you're actually one of these, unless you're like OpenAI, no one cares that you're an AI company. Um, so
And
vendors and
yeah,
publishers started, yeah,
to your point, there's a lack of critical thinking when it comes to the reason why. So, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think what we saw last year was if you say you're AI, you're AI. I think there was even like a QSR company that said, like, take out AI, and like people just loved it and they were still they were still going to it. My point there is, now I think we're getting to the point of asking why, but we don't know where to look. So it's still kind of a black box in some senses. But speaking of just black boxes and the general supply chain, I think SPO is a really big question that comes into play, because the demand side always asks for it, but the supply side always wants to monetize, right? So there's a juxtaposition there in terms of how it plays. Um,
right.
what do you think the modern SPO strategy looks like today? Obviously, you need to make sure you're monetizing correctly on the pub side, but you need to make sure that there aren't too many hops of resellers. So would love to hear what your take is on supply path optimization and how it's going to evolve, or it is evolving today.
Sure. I think there's two really important facets of this as a publisher. Okay. There is the request, and there's also ads.text.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, I was very judgmental of a lot of these companies that were saying, oh, we've done SPO and it's like made us a lot of money and stuff like that. And I was also pretty, like, I was just convinced there's no way this works. Right. And now, having gone through it very recently and seeing the positive results of it, both for our SaaS clients and our rev share clients, there's a very specific strategy here that makes sense. So the first thing is trying to understand, as a publisher, where reselling is helping and where it isn't. Okay. And so what I mean by that is, I went through one of our publishers' accounts and they had 54 Hubmatic lines in there on Scott text. Right. And so we reached out to Pubmatic and said, where are you buying? And they're like, basically 95% is through our direct seat. Right. And say, cool. So you really don't need 54 other reasons, right? Basically, you're getting 54 requests per request, even though you're still only spending basically in one path. Right?
Yep.
And so we ended up doing this type of process with a lot of our clients and exchanges, and whittled that massively down. For that Pubmatic example, I think we found like 2 other exchanges where they actually were spending because they had some type of like green deal or whatever it may be, that was open that way, right?
Okay.
And so we went down that path. We also reached out to a lot of SSPs who had a lot of lines, right? Like a lot of lines, including lines of companies I've never heard of, right? Like, why is Aditude appearing in some seller's JSON of a company I've literally never knew existed?
Yeah.
And said, hey, you have 20 lines. How much of these do you need? Right. And almost all of them came back to us. So like, yeah, we really only need 2 or 3. And I said, great, cool. We're cutting everything else out. And so step 1 for us with a lot of our clients was basically, we're going to massively cut everything out and just see what happens. We're going to launch it. We're just going to see what happens. Right. And lo and behold, 2 things happen very quickly. Okay. Our direct SSP spend, so that publisher's Pubmatic spend, went up. Why? Because their efficiency went way up, right? As well as their average fill rate went up again, because theoretically, even though their requests stay the same, their requests didn't stay the same, right? When we told all these exchanges, like, we're deleting all of these lines, do not make those requests, right? Block those requests. They did, and it actually worked in our favor. The second is, I feel like you guys may work with them too, but like the Jounce score. Right?
Yep.
Like, all of these publishers' Jounce scores went through the roof, right? They went from either like untrusted or supply chain risk of 20, 30, 40% to like 1%, right? And it wasn't like we had to wait weeks. It was like 3 or 4 days later, we were like, okay, the strategy works on the ads.tech side. We're making way more money, right? And publishers are happy, right? Especially because they're getting paid by the SSPs that they want to get paid by, and not necessarily a bunch of middlemen. So that was the first thing that we saw worked really well. The second thing was kind of going back to that traffic shaping, right? Is basically like, if you can either cut out a ton of, I won't even say unvaluable or like less valuable, like non-valuable, if that's a word, requests, and shift that to more valuable requests, right? It basically increases the SSP's return on request, right? You guys are an exchange, like, you want to make sure you're profitable, right? And so like, when we think about an Aditude, cool, how do we get the request CPM at the exchange level as high as possible? Because then they're going to be maximizing their ROI. There's not going to be throttles put in place. There's not going to be blocks put in place at the DSP level, et cetera, right? And so, again, we've taken publishers where we've either substantially cut out, let's say, 30% of the requests, but their impressions and revenue went up, or we've redistributed the requests. How do you redistribute requests? Again, you cut off requests to that unvaluable users where there's consistently no fill. And maybe you consider a strategy like, hey, I'm a website that doesn't refresh ads. right? Well, if this user is consistently getting really high bids, maybe I should refresh ads on that user, right? And redistribute the requests. So SSPs, DSPs, whoever's out there on the open exchange see an increasing value per user on average on your website. And so those two things we've seen work time and time again across tens and tens of billions of requests a month. And we're getting positive feedback from our advertisers as well, that like, sites that were maybe not profitable or break even for them are now very profitable for them, where the publisher is also making a lot.
Absolutely. And I feel like all of these methodologies and approaches all goes back to kind of like the core of where Aditude started, at least from where I'm sitting, which is really helping kind of smaller publishers at scale be more efficient, make more revenue. So outside of like kind of the traffic shaping, how else are you building kind of more effective data pipelines? And how can publishers also approach this in a bit more of a cost-effective way?
Yeah, so we had the added benefit of being able to pool all of these publishers together, maybe not from a demand perspective, but from a data perspective, right? And so even if you're a publisher with 1 million page views a month, we can look at similarities on that website versus our network as a whole, right? And find patterns at the smallest data set to help you make these types of decisions, right? Like this user is not valuable, this user is valuable, this exchange is not valuable, et cetera, et cetera. And so a publisher that's, I wouldn't say necessarily long tail, 1 million pages is still a decent amount of traffic as a publisher, but kind of in that mid tail of the space can partner with a vendor like us to either educate them on this and help them build it out internally, or to use some of our own tech to do that. If I was a smaller publisher myself and I'm looking to basically get 90% of the way there of everything that we just talked about without spending a penny, right? Because that's probably what some publishers are thinking right now. You don't need a crazy LLM to accomplish, again, like 90% of this. You can get a lot of the way there by looking at the law of averages and just saying, okay, on average, this subset of users, this country, whatever it may be, this combination of country and operating system never fills. So just cut it out, stop making requests, let's just move on, right? And kind of just see how your performance on the other tranches of your traffic improves over time. Yeah. And then beyond that, like one of the things that I think is really interesting or unique about Aditude, maybe a lot of publishers don't know this about us, is we do host webinars a lot, or we will teach you how to do this kind of stuff, right? So our whole business model is like building tech for publishers. We don't get a percentage of spend and things like that, right? You're essentially white labeling or renting our tech. And so to be able to effectively use that, we have to teach you how to use it, right? And so we do talk to publishers all the time about SPO and teach them how to build their own strategies around traffic shaping and so forth. Our flooring is a pretty big open book to a lot of our publishers who are really interested in learning how to do this themselves or how to sort of come up their own strategies and layer on top of our strategies. So yeah, strongly encourage people to to listen into some of those or just reach out. We're happy to help sort of educate and not just say use our tech because it's the best.
Yeah, but I think it really comes down to like there's strength in numbers. I hate to say that, and when you're a singular site, causation isn't correlation when you're just looking at your data. But when you have someone like Aditude who has this more holistic network view of the data, and you even send trillions of data points a day, you're able to make a lot more consistent and definable answers and solutions to things.
Exactly.
And I guess, speaking of numbers and then things scaling up, there's a lot of interest going into like server side, and I think also app monetization, just because generally speaking, you have more publishers developing their own apps. It's more accessible. What do you think the biggest opportunity is and potential pitfall of publishers going to server-side Previd and then also leveraging or trying to scale up their own apps as they go to market?
Sure. So first thing you have to decide as a publisher is, are you going to build a real app, or are you going to just build a web view inside of an app, right? So depending on like how technical your team is, that's a real decision that you have to make. A web view inside of an app is infinitely easier, right? But there's pros and cons to that, right? The pros are like you just slap your website inside of Android and iOS and it works.
It's size, you'd be good to go.
Exactly. Cons are no cookies and things like that. So like, even though you can run client side auctions, it's probably not going to perform as well as it would if you had true like native app, right?
Yeah.
On the app side, it's still, there's some big whales in this space in terms of monetization. It is still very much the Wild West for in-app monetization. Pre-bid server, pre-bid mobile, it is finally starting to get a little bit of recognition internally in like the pre-bid organization, but like historically speaking, no one was really paying attention to it, right? And so what we've learned over the last year and a half of building out our SDKs is basically a lot of trial and error. A lot of the docs out there for pre-bid server and for pre-bid mobile are just incorrect or lacking the necessary information. Apple is moving way faster in terms of like security and decisions around ads than pre-bid is, right? And that's not no shot at pre-bid or anything like that. Like, Apple is making decisions in its own kind of ecosystem. And so for us, we spent a really long time trying to do two things. Mimic exactly the docs that are out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
And to no avail. It did not work. And second, thinking about how we were going to set up pre-bid server, right? So when you move to pre-bid server, you are now hosting, caching, right? And making the decision of that entire auction on your server. You as a publisher are now taking on that cost, right? When it's on web and you're running client side, the browser is taking on all that cost. There's really no cost to you as a publisher. When you're thinking about pre-bid server or in-app monetization, you as a publisher or someone has to realize that cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I know a lot of publishers went down like, oh, I'm going to try to integrate with AWS or some type, or Microsoft Azure and some type of like cloud-based server infrastructure. Easy to set up, super hard to configure, right? There's a reason why it's so cheap. It's because you get no support and it doesn't really work out of the box. But then when you actually start to scale it up, it's actually incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Incredibly.
All usage based.
Yeah. So if you talk to Aditude, you talk to really any major company out there that's running server-side auctions, none of them do it in the cloud.
Yep.
They all use bare metal, right? And so for us, our biggest learning lesson was like, we have to set up hundreds and hundreds of servers around the country and the world to handle this ourselves, to cut our costs down. And then the final kind of lesson that we've learned is basically you have to have active communication with the SSPs that you're talking to run these types of auctions. So most SSPs, while they may support pre-bid server and then they support in-app monetization, it's the traditional web-based banner and video SSPs, they don't enable that by default because, again, it's costly to them too, right? It's like you have to have these conversations and then ask them what they want in the request, right? You on pre-bid and you look for what Rubicon wants from an in-app response or request, and then you talk to them. They're two totally different things, right? And so collecting that information, understanding what each SSP's request needs to look like is going to be kind of the name of the game. That's going to be the game changer. If you just make a standard pre-bid server request in-app, you're probably never going to get a bid response. It's not going to work. You need to sit there and pull your hair out and throw your arms in the air. Why isn't it working? It's because, again, documentation's poor externally, even internally in a lot of these companies, it's poor, right? And so a lot of trial and error. And that's why a lot of companies, not just us, there's a lot of companies out there that are basically white labeling pre-bid server infrastructure because they've gone through all of that, those trials and tribulations, all that pain to figure that out. So it's, as a publisher, way faster and way cheaper to just rent this than to try to build this out yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, this is why we can't have nice things, right? Always.
That's what it's over to close it out.
Yeah. Well, Jared, this has been great. I feel like we could keep talking for another hour, but to kind of wind things down a little bit, what is one key takeaway that our listeners could apply to their publishing strategies from this conversation?
Yeah. So this is actually a point that one of our clients made to me a few weeks ago, which is don't expect anything from the market, right? Don't let the market dictate what your business is going to do. You should go to the market and dictate it yourself. And what I mean by that is don't be beholden to one provider for all of your traffic, i.e. SEO at Google, right? Mm-hmm. Don't let exchanges dictate the price of your inventory, right? Don't let your internal team say you can't do something, right? There are probably cheap but effective solutions out there for all of your problems. Whether it's building an app, right? Talk about SEO and Google. Well, go build an app, right? AI is maybe impacting search results. Again, go build an app, right? If it's, hey, the market says my inventory is worth 50 cents. No, it isn't. That's what you're telling them it's worth right now. Go tell them it's worth $1 and see what happens, right? And so don't be satisfied with the status quo. Always try to, improve your thing.
That gives me a reminiscent memory of Henry Ford when he's like, I wanted to build a fast car. I would have. That would have competed with the Pontiac and everybody else. And he built the Ford Mustang under its own vision versus having it done because the market said that they just wanted a fast car. So great wisdom, Jared. Thank you again for the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm excited to see some of the things that are coming down the pipe for you, because clearly you guys are making some moves and some noise, and it's good to celebrate and see.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like now that I'm on this podcast, I'm officially made it. So this is exciting for me.
Welcome back anytime.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pubway podcast. This episode is brought to you by SeedTag, the global leader in neurocontextual advertising. Learn more and reach out to us at seedtag.com.